everyone again coming to this webinar. My name is Ivona Alfred. I'm the Knowledge and Education Manager at ITDP Global. I'm excited to host this webinar on parking management tools with case studies stemming from our brand new report, Opportunity of Reforming Parking. Feel free to visit the publication page and read the report, as well as ITDP's other publications on parking. I dropped several links there in the chat, so feel free to explore. And just a little bit about the reason why we are here today. Parking management is a critical yet underappreciated component of urban mobility. Many cities face challenges aligning parking policies with broader transportation goals, leading to inefficiencies and inequitable use of public space. So today we'll explore innovative approaches in reimagining parking, learning from two cities, Montreal, Canada, and Kigali, Rwanda. So with that, let me introduce and welcome the panel, starting with Dana Yanoka, ITDP Global Senior Research Manager. I just wanted to mention that Dana works a lot on parking management and also non-motorized transport, and she has authored a number of publications I shared in the chat. She'll moderate today's session and also do a brief framing about the new publication she has launched. Next, we'll go to our speaker from Montreal, Charles de la Chevautier, who is the Executive Director of Business and Mobility Strategies at the Agency for Sustainable Mobility of the City of Montreal. Charles will talk about how this new agency is thinking about parking and curbside management to better optimize the use of parking space. And then finally, we'll pass it on to Stanley Chanzu, who is an urban planner at ITDP Africa. He'll present on Kigali, Rwanda, and how the city is gearing up for addressing its parking challenges and opportunities. So with that, I just wanted to welcome the entire panel again and pass it on to Dana.
Great. Thank you so much, Ivona. Let me just get my slides up here. Are you able to see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for joining today. I'm excited for this conversation. Like Ivona mentioned, I'm just going to start with a brief framing that stems from the report that we just released called The Opportunity of Reforming Parking. So I wanted to just quickly situate this report in kind of a suite of resources that ITDP has released recently. This is kind of a next step or a deep dive stemming from a report we released a couple of years ago called Taming Traffic. The Taming Traffic report is a broader, very comprehensive report that looks at a lot of different strategies for reducing demand for driving. We look at parking pricing and management as one of those strategies in the Taming Traffic report, but the Opportunity of Reforming Parking really goes deeper, especially looking at the interrelatedness of on and off street parking and how cities are able to start thinking about and approaching parking in a more coordinated way. So we include a couple of case studies in this new report, and we're really excited to have two of the case study cities that we include here with us today. So I think many of us on this call would agree that parking is something that really shapes our cities and our streets. The way that we store private vehicles really impacts our experience as we move around our cities. And it's more than just affecting the look of our streets, but really parking impacts how accessible our streets are. If we have cars and other private vehicles parked at the curb, that means that other modes don't have access to that space, other uses don't have access to that space. And then beyond, the idea of like regulated parking, when we have vehicles that are parked more haphazardly, whether that's on sidewalks or blocking bike lanes, it makes those environments a lot less safe and less inviting to people outside of cars. So in other words, it makes it really hard to make the case or try to convince people to walk on a sidewalk or bike in bicycle lanes that are blocked by vehicles. And on the flip side of that, when you are on a street and you see nothing but cars, then everywhere can kind of seem like a potential parking space. At the same time, in many of our cities today, there are so many different uses that are competing for space. And this isn't just at the curb, but it's also off street as well. But when we think about the curb, obviously car parking, but there's all these other uses that we could potentially consider for that space. Things like bike share stations, bike parking, pickup and drop off zones for taxis and ride shares, loading and unloading zones for cargo. And more recently, cities are thinking about things like public electric vehicle charging. But many cities are still prioritizing on-street vehicle parking over all of these other uses. And that is really an implicit subsidy for drivers that doesn't really support other modes or people outside of cars. At the same time, there is lots of valuable land in downtown areas that's being set aside for things like surface parking or parking garages, again, at the expense of other uses, things like housing units and retail space. And this poses a big challenge in a lot of our cities where we're dealing with things like housing shortages and housing unaffordability. At the same time, vehicle use and ownership are growing in a lot of places, especially in rapidly urbanizing areas. And evidence shows that more parking, ample, underpriced parking leads to more driving. And there are a lot of costs that come with that. It's more expensive for individuals who are relying on vehicles as their primary mode of transportation. But there's also these external costs that are borne by everyone, not just people who are driving. People who are using all other modes are paying these costs as well. So those are things like environmental costs, emissions that contribute to climate change, and societal costs like road traffic, fatalities, injuries, and even things like division of community and social fabric as a result of roadway expansion. Fortunately, though, in recent years, momentum has really been building to improve parking. There's been more focus on parking reform as a way for cities to actually deliver the kinds of streets that people want. And this isn't just happening at the city level. Parking reform is also being taken up at higher levels of government. So, for example, in the US, California eliminated parking minimums close to public transit stations at the state level. And in New Zealand, parking minimums were eliminated at the national level as a way to address housing unaffordability. So when we talk about parking reform, this concept covers a lot of different actions and strategies. I think we'll hear about a lot of these today from our two presenters. But the idea is really to bring parking supply closer to demand. And there's really two key policies that cities can think about implementing and think about implementing together to really maximize the impacts. So for on-street parking, that's pricing and managing on-street parking. And for off-street parking, eliminating or reducing off-street parking minimums. So these two strategies can have significant impacts for on-street parking pricing. Data from Mexico City and elsewhere shows these policies can lead to less congestion. This is a potential new or increased municipal revenue source. And it gives cities the opportunity to prioritize street space in a more equitable way. And then for off-street parking minimums, reducing these can help to deliver more active streetscapes, more affordable housing and green space. And eliminating off-street parking minimums can also contribute to significant emissions reductions. So ITDP also recently released an interactive tool that helps users to estimate potential greenhouse gas emissions reductions of off-street parking strategies. We call this the simple calculator of project effects for off-street parking policy reform. I know that's a mouthful. We refer to it as the scope tool. And you might recognize the scope tool term because we have these tools for other modes of sustainable transport as well. We have one for BRT and one for footpaths. So this is kind of adding to that suite of tools. But really the idea here is to help advocates and city officials make the case for eliminating off-street parking minimums as a climate strategy in addition to other economic and air quality and health benefits. And then to wrap up, I just wanted to provide a couple of key actions that we describe in the report. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on these, but essentially these are kind of the takeaways from the 5 case study cities that we looked at. So all 5 of these cities on the slide have really taken this more coordinated, cohesive approach to parking and really have thought about both on and off street parking and how these can work together. So from the experiences of these 5 cities, we have developed these action items that can help cities that want to take this type of approach have a sense of where to start and how to think about this. So just to quickly go through these, first thinking about establishing a vision, really aligning parking as part of the broader sustainable transport system. This might seem obvious, but this doesn't happen in a lot of cities. Parking can be sort of isolated from the transportation department or planning, like urban planning department. And that can really lead to inefficiencies between these 2 groups that are, should be working towards the same type of vision, thinking about access and public space management. So really ensuring that there is better alignment between parking and transportation and urban planning for the city. Next is institutionalization. So really thinking about how managing on and off street parking can happen in alignment. Again, if only one type of parking is being managed and the other is underpriced, demand is just going to shift towards the less restricted option. So it's really important to think about how these 2 types of parking influence and can support each other. Next is thinking about data. It's really important to understand where parking spaces are in the city, how they're being regulated, and how they're being used. This is really important for informing evidence-based policies and not just sort of policies that aren't based on the actual reality on the ground. And so it's really important to think about creating this comprehensive sort of database of parking if it doesn't exist, or making sure to continue to collect data over the course of policy changes and implementation to make sure to track progress and report on success. And then lastly is the funding piece. So thinking about dedicating funding for parking, making sure that this is part of city budgets and that there is long-term funding for parking programs. There's also an opportunity to generate revenue from things like priced on-street parking. So it's really important to think about how that revenue is going to be used, whether that's going to be applied to the administrative costs of running the program, whether that's going to be allocated to support other types of sustainable transport projects, and just making sure that that revenue that's being generated doesn't become the primary goal of the parking program, but instead just helps to support those broader visions that were established at the outset. So with that, I will wrap up. Again, the opportunity of reforming parking is available now. You can get to the publications page from this QR code and also the link in the chat. So I'll stop there and pass it over to Charles. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dana. Charles, is pulling up his presentation.
Is it on?
Yes.
Very well. Thank you, Dana. Good morning from Montreal. Bonjour à tous. Very happy to be here with you all and present to you the Agence de Mobilité Durable and what we do in Montreal. Actually, after Dana's presentation, I think it's perfect. The fit will be perfect. I will actually try to show you how we're trying to actually accomplish what Dana just showed us. How we operationalize a parking strategy or a new vision for parking. So very quickly, I'll give you an overview or a quick overview of what the agency is, and then go through the reason why the City of Montreal created a paramunicipal organization like the agency, and then give an overview of some ongoing projects that we have at the agency and that are trying to all answer the elements that Dana showed us at the end on her very last slide. So quickly, well, Montreal, for those who don't know, we're in Canada. We're on the eastern side of the country. We are an island in Montreal. It's a population of 2 million people, general average density of about 4,000 people per kilometer. So the core is fairly dense, probably one of the densest cities in North America, but overall, it's a very North American city with an average density. Montreal loves its sustainable mobility. We are the birth city of the Big C system. Outside of Montreal, it's called PBSC. You can find them in London, in New York, for example. We have a very large car sharing community, more than 4,000 cars. We're the first city with a fully electric taxi fleet. And over the last few years, Montreal has been investing quite a bit in a rapid, fully protected biking system that is open for season, 12 months a year. Of course, we have winters, pretty severe winters here in Montreal. So it's quite a challenge to keep that biking network open, but we do, and it's very popular around the year. So first and foremost, the agency, actually, we are a very young organization. We've started our operation back in 2020, just a few months before the pandemic. We are a nonprofit paramunicipal corporation, which means the City of Montreal provides the agency's operating and capital budget, and they're all reviewed and approved by the city. We have an independent board, but all members are appointed by the city. At the core of our operations, we have parking management and its enforcement, which is very unique. Usually, parking management is under one city department or an independent authority, while enforcement is done by the police department, or there can also be privatized, which we see often in Europe, for example. So this gives a great capacity for the city, for the agency to actually intervene. For example, if a car is parked in a bike lane, it endangers the life of cyclists trying to drive around it, or we can also quickly intervene when a car is parked in a bus lane, because a car park will slow down the speed of the bus system. We're also responsible for EV charging system, the public system. We've added the taxi and ride-hailing operations recently, regulations, and we're also there to rethink innovation and changing of practices in a more of a for the City of Montreal and its citizens. Our mission is to improve quality of life and to contribute to economic vitality through management and enforcement for both the curb space and the off-street parking. I'll get to that more in details during the presentation. The agency in numbers, I will not go through all these numbers. There's one number I want to showcase. It's the one at the very lower right. It's 748,000 users of our app, and I'll show you. Dana was talking about information, data. So it's very, it's not common that a city actually owns such a digital asset that is so popular and so used, and the agency wants to leverage this asset over the next few years. And I will give you an example on how we hope to do that. So why did the city of Montreal created the Agence de Mobilité Durable? Well, if you go back 100 years, not much more than that, streets were for everyone. They were actually, you could see, if you look at those postcard pictures, you from maybe circa 1920 and in that area, you can see pedestrian, you see horse-drawn carriage, omnibus, trolleybus. The cars were starting to appear, but very quickly over the 20s, the 1920s, there was a decision to actually leave the street to the cars only. So in a way, the mobility revolution that our cities are going through right now, our societies actually did that same revolution, but 100 years ago. It's now we're just wondering, should we not provide more space to bring back the space for the other modes of transportation? This is really the reason at the core. And of course, with the car came the parking. And parking is very strange, in the sense that contrary to other modes of transportation, like transit, like highways, like roads, cities have not planned parking in a centralized manner. So the only thing they would usually do, if they would actually implicate themselves at all, would be to put those parking minimums for every usage. So that created an overabundance of off-street parking. And this is one of the problem that we have, since there is an overabundance. We want to do other things with the space on the street, and there is an overabundance off-street. And those are both communicating vessels. And how can we balance things out so we can actually do something else for mobility on the streets? So some ongoing project to actually describe what we're hoping to accomplish over the next few years. So first and foremost, the digital inventory of the curb. So Dana gave us a really good example of what the curb is, explain to us what a curb is. These are numbers that are Montreal numbers. So for example, a busy bus stop, it's about 1,000 passengers boarding and alighting. Paid parking, it creates rotation. It's about 18 cars in average in Montreal. We have Montreal's winters, and we love to have terraces for extending the restaurant. We were doing this before even COVID. It's about 100 additional clients for a restaurant or bar. EV charging station on street, we have about 1,600, 83% are slow charge, and they're on street. That's only 3 cars per day. And for example, a big C stand for the bike share system, that's it's up to 50 clients per day. So you see right there that for essentially the same space on the street, you have different values. But how can we actually identify the right value, the right activity, or the right function to attribute the curb? And this is the real challenge when we talk about curbside management. Unfortunately, and Montreal is not unique in the world, this is the state of our curbside. It's usually signage that is partial, that is obstructed, it's damaged, it's incomprehensible, it's usually not up to date, very hard to actually know what regulation is active at which moment during the day or during the season. So it's a real challenge, and it needs, in many cities, especially in North America, because the curbside is a concept that is much more popular in North America because of the space that we have, so much space we have on the street. Well, we're trying to inventory in a digital fashion this information. So for us in the city of Montreal, it also, curbside management will start with the inventory of the curb. Then it's a matter of allocating and optimizing that space. Then you need to control that space. And this is where having management and enforcement together under the same roof, under the same organization is very key. And then in the end, you have information. Where can I park and when? And how can I pay? And you need to make that payment very easy. Like I said also before, the space on the street and the space off street, they're both communicating vessels. So if you want to address the on-street parking, you need to actually address the off-street as well. So actually, we're very proud of this. But yes, yesterday, Montreal the Agence, actually, we inaugurated our very first mobility hub. City of Montreal wants us to open 150 hubs over the next 25 years. What are hubs in Montreal? It's essentially three components. It's a mobility component with a variety of mobility services. There are also socialization component where we make them as a very attractive space for people to meet, either even like, for example, when you wait to charge your car, you have a space. It's not just a banal parking lot. And there's also an information component, something very similar to what you could find, for example, in a transit station. So those hubs are attractive and comfortable and safe space that concentrates all that range of sustainable services. And we want them to be actually in the neighborhoods. So they're very easy to access. It's a bit like a bus station. When you drive every day, but you see a bus, you see a bus stop, you know there's a service available. But how can you know if there's an electric charging station close by? How do you know there's a car share program close by? How do you know if you can buy a bike and keep it in a safe manner? So all these things need to be very accessible to people close to their home, and to actually promote these modes of transportation. So developing this network actually is also we're aiming at different objectives. Like first and foremost, like I said, we want to free up the on-street parking space for other purposes: terraces, bike lane, bus lane. We want to enhance the real estate assets that are all these parking lots, the off-street parking lot that city owns. We want to facilitate travel by car. We also, by developing a network, we hope to meet the instantaneous demand for traveling. And we want to improve the user experience by making these spaces feeling safe and comfortable. Right now, we only manage at the agency 74 lots, but we have inventoried all the possibilities at the City of Montreal, and this is the potential that we could actually develop over the next decades. So it's limitless almost. Our very first hub that we opened yesterday, this is what it used to look like just last year. And now you have all these, this new lot with some greening. You see how much green there is to reduce the heat islands. All the pavement is also absorbing, so you can actually have a better stormwater management. We have a covered bike parking. We have EV fast charging stations. As you can see, these equipment for charging, they're big equipment and they cannot go on the curb anymore. So they need to go off street, and we need that space if we want to electrify the entire fleet. And of course, we have all these dedicated car parks. So you can see with those little green symbols, they're all the car park communauté symbol here in Montreal. So we are actually started building converting our second hub. This is what it will look like. This is obviously a digital image, but again, you can see how much green there is. And the reason we can do that is because we can actually allocate the parking space very differently. When you look at a parking lot, we all know that those parking lots have been designed for 24th of December at 3 p.m. This is the maximum demand, and they need to accommodate that demand. But the rest of the year, we have sometimes 20, 30, 40% availability on a daily basis. So the idea is to actually take that extra space and convert it to, create some biofiltration basins and retention basins. We want to put eventually some parcel lockers. We want to put a secure bike parking. We have a pilot project coming in. So all these services will come and actually be added to these sites. Also, this is for the public parking. But what about the private parking? And we also know that there's quite a lot of demand and availability. So during the day, some business towers parking might be occupied, but during the evening, during the summer, during the weekends, that demand is not the same thing. So we're working right now to actually develop with our private stakeholders to actually develop a parking strategy here at the City of Montreal so that we can actually inform motorists, but optimize as well the occupancy of all these parking lots for their owners. And of course, to actually guarantee some kind of quality standards throughout the network. I was telling earlier before, I was saying how much enforcement is important. Well, right now, we are investing quite a bit. We are launching, it's an ongoing project as we speak. We will launch license plate recognition technology. It exists already in many other cities in North America and in Europe, but at the City of Montreal, we hope to actually use it at a very large we hope to equip a very large number of vehicles to actually make enforcement possible, but as well to actually accumulate data on the use of the curb space. And this is very interesting. It might seem trivial to actually say that we will use parking enforcement technology to accumulate data, but we need to know that this technology was never developed to actually accumulate data and make data analysis. And it's all this transformation of the adaptation of this technology that my group has been working on for the last 3 years. And it's not trivial at all. It's quite a difficult task to actually make occupation rates, parking duration. How do you measure parking occupation rate, for example? It seems simple, but it's very different. When you start measuring, the car might have left already. Is it on an hourly basis? And all these notions, though, there's quite a lot of knowledge and methodology that has not been developed for parking, contrary for traffic and circulation and transportation in general. Information and payment, like I said, we have an app that is very popular, and we are on right now modernizing this app. So as we all know, trip planners, they lie to us. When you look at the time to actually, when you compare different modes of transportation to go from point A to point B, well, the car is always favored because the trip planners will not consider the time to go get your car or the time to find parking at your destination, because you have all these people driving for the elusive parking right in front of the address where they want to go. They're gonna go around the block once, two times, 3 times. Then eventually they will just decide to go park 1 or 2 blocks away, and then you need to add that walking back to your destination. So, but for parking, for transit, you need to provide the customer information in real time. How much time in the bus, in the vehicle, how much time waiting, how much time transfer, etc. Same thing with the TNCs, where they provide the information for the time waiting. So what would happen if a trip planner would actually provide motorists with the right information? And this is the gamble that we're saying we're taking. We think that providing the real information at the planning moment would actually provide the motorists with maybe taking the right decision. Say, oh, maybe I won't take the car because it will take longer and will cost me more. Of course, we hope to actually, by using the data from our enforcement technology, we actually hope to provide some data usage on the street and tell motorists where they have higher probabilities to find parking. Also, we are implementing modular pricing to better manage demand, encourage motorists to consider alternative, optimize the use of space for the function, and generate knowledge again, see how the habits of users, of motorists will change with modulating pricing. So this is it. I'm done with my presentation. I will now pass it to Stanley to give us a better understanding of what's happening in Kigali. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Hello, Stanley. Okay, we can see the PowerPoint. Yes, it's working. And we just cannot hear or see you yet.
Okay, am I audible enough?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Charles, for that comprehensive analysis of what you're doing in Montreal. I hope it doesn't dwarf what I'm going to present now in Kigali. So I'm going to touch on a project that ITDP Africa has been working on behalf of City of Kigali. Kigali is based in Africa region in the Eastern Africa part of this particular continent. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of why the city decided to venture into parking management. So as you look at this particular chart of how people travel in Kigali, you find that the majority walk and cycle at 52%, while 17% use public transport and 15% use the car. But when you look at provision of parking, you find that street space on even particular streets goes to about 100%, providing space for the 15% who are the minority in this particular mode share. So the city decided that to have a very ambitious target for emissions by 2050 at net zero. And according to UN Environment, you find that most of emissions in these developing cities in these countries are 80% are from urban traffic. So why parking management? Once you deal with parking management, you reduce the dependency on the car and introduce a shift to more sustainable modes like public transport and walking. That's really working towards their goal of targets of emissions by 2050. Also, another common reason why cities are looking at parking management is, if you are aware, African cities and local authorities view parking as a source of revenue. And parking management comes in to bridge that revenue loss in maybe laxity and enforcement or collection of revenue by manual means. Then you also control the need to come with your car to the city if you make parking management an endeavor of the city by making sure that accessing the city is quite expensive using the car, as you provide public transport modes as the city of Kigali is targeting to implement a BRT in the near future. So I go next to the real parking assessment for Kigali city. So we looked at the existing parking system where we found that the Millennium Savings Corporation, which is a company, is contracted by the city of Kigali to collect on-street fees via either cash or mobile, and also assures you of the security of your parked car. So this particular system ensures that it's the responsibility of the officers from MISIC to request for payment. So once in a while, a driver or a motorist can escape if the provider officers cannot locate him in time. And also the fees depends on time and vehicle category. And during the particular period of this particular study, the fees was capped at 500 Rwandan francs per day. But as at today, 26 September, it's now increased to 100 per day. This is actually charging 200 Rwandan francs per hour, but capped at 5 hours. So just a chart on the existing parking rates. You will find that that black line, you can see that labels on street is the lowest charge for parking in the city of Kigali as we speak. With off-street, the other figures represent off-street parking, charging higher, but still having a good occupancy. This actually translates to the pricing not being actually an issue of parking in Kigali. So we also looked at several streets where we find that this particular KN4 Avenue has organized parallel parking, creating ample space for a good walkway. But other streets have disorganized parking. We have this perpendicular, parallel, and somebody just parking on a footpath, which makes the walking environment quite unbearable. Then we have these similar cases in the city of lack of bicycle parking, where you have to chain your cycle to the nearest existing pole or barrier as your parking mechanism for your bike. So when we conducted several studies to determine the parking situation, including the parking duration, the inventory, we looked at the accumulation of parking in the city. And as you can see from this particular chart, it peaks around 13 hours in the day. This is for on-street and off-street parking. And it actually provides about 6,474 equivalent car spaces at that particular peak. Then setback and off-street parking experience accumulation around that particular midday, but on-street peaks later in later in the day. So this is a map representation of the on-street occupancy results at peak, having a 78 peak occupancy from the study we conducted and the analysis, while providing for 2,776 equivalent car spaces. And this is a parking duration analysis telling you how many hours vehicles park on streets in Kigali CBD, with most of them going between 1 to 2 hours. Another analysis of off-street inventory data showed we analyzed 63 facilities, having a total inventory of 5,379 equivalent car spaces. And we only observed bicycle parking at 48% of these facilities, with 10% having it as dedicated. Peak off-street occupancy translates to 64%. And at this particular period of time where there is peak occupancy, 1962 spaces are available for occupancy. So we look at parking management principles and proposals for the city. How do we solve these disparities in occupancy and pricing for this particular city to achieve better parking management and revenue for the city? So we first of all look at the old school, how they have been doing it. You increase private vehicle use by providing parking as a public good, that motorists need space in our city, so you have to provide for them. And then the government pushes private buildings to create more parking through minimum parking requirements, whereby you cannot get development approval unless you provide a number of parking spaces depending as a ratio of the square meters of your building. Then the government keeps on increasing the road infrastructure for parking lots, because there's increase in the demand, assumed demand of that parking, while not really managing the existing slots. So what did we base on our arguments on proposals? We actually discussed with the city and stakeholders that it is actually impossible to fully cater for the parking demand, because as Dana already presented in the previous slides, the more you provide for parking, the more you attract more cars to the city, the more you need more parking, and it becomes an ending cycle of parking supply and demand. So cities need to treat parking as a commodity and not as a right. They need to actually look at the majority of residents of the city, the modes they use, and provide for them as priority. Parking should be actually one of the last things you do as you are doing street design, as it's actually caters for the minority of the road users. So you also limit the total supply of parking. This can be helped through making sure that off-street parking caters for the need for on-street parking. As you can see, there's only 64% occupancy at peak, which means there's about 36% of the spaces which can accommodate some of the parking that is happening on street, and leave that space for other sustainable modes. Then we also look at government should actually spend more revenue on NMT and public transport, rather than some of our governments also venture in this issue of off-street parking, building multi-story buildings to also venture in off-street parking. So we also held a stakeholder consultation workshop in the city of Kigali. These are members of one group having a consultation on site while looking at the existing parking situation. And later in the day, workshop attendees, after discussions and deliberations, having to present on some of their recommendations. And it was interesting to see that some of them are actually looking at reorganizing the parking layout so that you can create more space for walking and cycling. And they were always talking about sustainable modes, crossings, and so forth, not really focusing on the car, which governments assume that should be the case. So on parking arrangements, this parallel parking is the best optimum way to manage your parking spaces. It uses less street space when you look at the arrangement of about 2 meters wide to 5 meters long, as opposed to angular parking and perpendicular parking. This space can be used after alignment, can be used to provide for NMT facilities, walking and cycling. So as results of this particular study, the city was quite welcoming and responsive to this. And this is just one of the streets that the city has decided to rearrange the parking to parallel. The technology provider has installed sensors, and the city has also provided for bike racks, as you can see in this particular picture. So to look at pricing, we realized that we need to ensure that the pricing is demand-based. So we looked at the example of Budapest in Hungary, where demand is quite high. In Zone A is the highest rated parking, and where demand is quite low, like the outskirts in Zone D is where you pay less parking. So that we need to discourage people coming to the city with their cars if you have already provided better alternatives of mode of transport. So on proposal fee levels and revision, we actually acknowledge that the city is actually charging hourly parking, and we recommended that they continue in the same spirit, but they should remove the caps so that it becomes, the more you park in the city past 5 hours, and so it has to be expensive so that it encourages circulation, encourages trade, and so forth. There's no need to come and park your car from morning to evening in a busy city. So we also decided that through consultation that they should not levy parking fees for bicycles and public transport buses, and review these fees quarterly, whereby the parking rates will be either increased or reduced according to zones when they reach 90%. So these are the proposed fee zones we arrived at, where we analyzed the occupancy and mapped out. Zone A has the highest occupancy, and we actually decided to increase the parking rate to 200 Rwandan francs. And I'm happy to announce that that is the current rate that they have adopted. And we also looked at Zone B and C, where we said, okay, after quarterly reviews, because this is the baseline for the system, after quarterly reviews, these fees can be revised upwards or downwards according to occupancy. On proposed car parking rates, which I've already mentioned in the previous slide there, we actually proposed the highest of 400 per hour, but after this consultation with the stakeholders in the meeting, we arrived at a compromise of 200 because of the willingness to pay, and also the willingness to accept the project from the stakeholders. They now really own the project and looking forward to this. So the current rate you can see here is still quite low. The black line below that chart, and what he had proposed as the red line. So the city has also embarked on developing a parking app to provide real-time information as recommended by the study. This Parika app is actually in test stages at parts of Remera in the city, where you can actually find parking spaces. It also tells you how many are available and how many are already occupied. It's actually still in test stage, and they are still developing and improving it. So we also looked at the current business model of the city and what we could propose. So we decided that the parking system should be fed in by the user, government, and operator, where the user makes payments and the government incentivizes the operator to provide better services, and also provide fixed service charge to the operator for the services rendered. The operator should invest, implement, and operate the parking system. On fee collection, we actually recommended that we move from the manual collection and make sure that this revenue is IT based, so that we actually bridge the loops where revenue gets lost to manual collection. where this ensures that when a parking event is started, the system or the app prompts you to make a payment, and the electronic record of the parking event is sent to the control center. And when you end the parking event, the account is closed. On enforcement, is still going to be IT based, but with on-ground officers from the police department, and also from the provider after prompts from the system, because there are sensors, and they're also going to install multiple cameras and receivers on the same, so that when you make a violation, either you are parking in a parking area or you have not made a payment, whether your car is clamped or picked up is actually initiated through the system once the officer scans your ID, your vehicle ID. On off-street parking regulations, we recommended abolishing minimum parking requirements and establishing maximums in the city, while also making sure that parking establishments are not actually encouraged within a 500-meter buffer of MRT and BRT stations, while facilitating shared parking arrangements where buildings have surplus parking. Upcoming buildings should actually reach an arrangement through facilitation from the Development Control Department, where they can use the parking, the surplus parking from the neighboring buildings, rather than having to provide parking as a requirement of development approval. Then we also need to discourage setback parking, because this disrupts an empty flow. And also make sure that as much as we provide the available parking spaces, they have to be accessible to persons with disability, the elderly, and also to women. So on this one, I am happy to announce that the city planner told us that they have started piloting removal of minimums in the city. And this is one of the buildings that they allowed the developer to construct without having to provide any parking space, any off-street parking space in this particular building. As you can see, the developer decided to use the best way to recoup investment on this building by making sure that the ground floor is retail. And you can see the ground floor is quite active on this particular building, as opposed to if it was offering a parking provision. So part of our study and also recommendations reached the developers of the Green City Kigali Master Plan, where we was able to provide feedback and recommendations based on the study and recommendations here. And we are happy to announce that the master plan was launched about 2 weeks ago. And these are some of the recommendations that are quite unique for this particular master plan, where they have introduced parking maximums of a max of 1 space per 6 buildings, of 6 dwellings, sorry. Then there is no car parking provision near any BRT stations. Then any interchange that connects public transport networks will include cycle parking, servicing, and charging facilities. They have also set maximums for any off-street parking arrangements, and also made sure that any such developments have to provide active commercial uses on the ground floor to make the street space active and safe for NMT users. Then they have also recommended shared parking spaces arrangement whereby buildings have to share a parking space if the supply is in surplus. So you don't need to construct parking if you can use the neighboring buildings parking. Then we also looked at revised roles and responsibilities to make sure that these organizations that are involved in parking do not duplicate roles or come into conflict, whereby the technology provider named Galaxy, funded by Smart Africa, will always provide and maintain the IT solutions. The traffic police will support in enforcement because it's mandated by law and their Traffic Police Act. MISIC, who is now the provider doing the enforcement and collection on behalf of COK, will continue with collection, but the money will go into a fund managed by the city. So the provider is not actually managing the money, it's just doing the collection and all the determining of fines, how the money should be used on NMT, sustainable modes, and paying the service charge to the provider will be handled by the city of Kigali through a dedicated parking unit that will be set up as a recommendation of this study. yeah, that's all for the city of Kigali as they gear on implementing these recommendations and Murakoze, which is thank you in the local dialect of Rwanda.
Thank you so much, Stanley. So I just want to bring the entire panel for just maybe one quick question. I know we've run out of time, but it's only a testament to the rich presentations that hopefully the audience is enjoying. So Dana, I'll rely on you to select those one or two crucial questions.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's great to see so many questions coming through in the Q&A and also rich discussion in the chat. So this is obviously a topic that a lot of people are really interested in. So something that I just wanted to make sure we touched on in the conversation is this idea that, you know, a lot of government officials and elected officials are not necessarily parking experts. And it can be really challenging to take on parking projects that, you know, that in theory down the line could mean less parking supply in the city. So just curious to hear from both of you what type of messaging your cities are using to communicate this new approach to parking, both like to the government and also to the public. So maybe start with you, Charles, and go to Stanley.
Sure. Well, the fact that we use the data helps quite a bit. There is so much political sensitivity surrounding parking and parking decisions that usually no decisions is traditionally has always been better than taking a decision, but the problem does not go away, of course. So since we've started using LPR technology to actually demonstrate by a fact that parking is quite available throughout a neighborhood where the city wants to make an intervention on the main thoroughfare. All preoccupation from business owners, from political officials, by citizens, everything just goes away. Quickly, there's a subway expansion here in Montreal in the East End. For 4 years, there will be quite a lot of impact on the street, where the subway will be built. So all the bus traffic will be moved on another street, which is more local. So they had to actually get rid of the entire parking. So we made a quick study. We recorded more than 300,000 license plates. That is a huge number that no engineering or consulting firm can actually provide in any studies. And this is the power of using LPR enforcement technology, adapting it for data, and actually then provide it to decision makers, and the project just went no problem. A few months ago, forget about that. You know, it would have been everybody would have blocked the project. Nothing would have gone forward.
Thanks, Charles. That's really helpful. Stanley, over to you.
Okay, so yeah, it's true. When you talk about parking management, most of our city officials, as I already mentioned, most of the cities look at parking as a major source of revenue for the local authorities. So when you talk about parking management, what comes into their mind is you are going to reduce the parking slots and also going to reduce our revenue and so forth. So it becomes a back and forth. But once you do the review of the pricing and convince them that whatever you think you're losing in revenue, you're going to gain by increasing and doing demand-based pricing and so forth, then they really are for the idea. And also, I think you also need a lot of capacity building, a lot of best case examples. And also, when you look at the city's goals, the city itself is looking at reducing vehicle dependency, looking at providing BRT. And as a public official, that should be the driving force for you to deliver. So what we did for Kigali is we made sure that we are on the same page on these particular aspects. We need to reduce dependence on vehicles so that in the near future, when BRT is implemented, we actually have sustainable ridership. And also we need to make sure that the spaces on our streets are actually optimally utilized. As we speak, I just did not mention it in the presentation. One of the streets is actually now introducing a cycle track because they changed the orientation. And you can see how the city is actually gearing towards that parking management. Now, if the pilot works, because this now, the test is on the pilot, you don't need actually to convince them about the rest. And now sister cities that we compete regionally, like Nairobi and Mombasa, are looking at Kigali as, why is Kigali surpassing us? We need also to do this and this. So if the pilot works, then everything works. If the pilot fails, then we are in trouble.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Thinking about pilots as test cases, as proof of concept for these types of interventions, and then then it feels like you're losing something if the pilot's taken away versus losing something for parking taken away. I think we may have to leave it there. We're a couple of minutes over. Thanks everyone for staying on with us. There's a lot more questions, so hopefully maybe we can have some offline answers to those and share those as a follow-up. But I'll turn it back over to you, Ivona.
Great, thank you so much, everybody. I am quite sad to be closing the session. It was really informative and amazing. So thank you so much, Stanley, Charles, for presenting on the two cities, and Dana, of course, for moderating. Please stay tuned for more webinars. We'll share the recording and presentations at the events page that I shared in the chat. And again, please keep on doing the great work that you are all doing in your cities around parking, and feel free to share with us, with ITDP. As you can tell, we are gathering a lot of those insights from cities where we work, but we also want to know what's happening everywhere around the world. So feel free to share with us at our general email, or email Dana or me. So with that, I really thank everyone for coming here. Until the next time, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good day.